Welcome back, panelists here. Washington Post White House Bureau Chief Ashley Parker, Playbook co-author Eugene Daniels, Stephen Hayes, founder of The Dispatch, and Aaron Haynes, editor-at-large of The 19th. And if you don't know about The 19th, you should, but it is an independent news organization dedicated to covering women in politics. Welcome to all of you. I want to start with the Senator Braun interview because, and Steve, I'm going to start on the right side of the aisle on this. What I sensed from Senator Braun was a discomfort on the issue as a whole. He is 100% pro-life. He campaigned on it as a senator. But he did seem uncomfortable being definitive. What does that tell us about the concern on the right about the politics of this?
Yeah, I agree with you that he did seem uncomfortable talking about it. I don't know that that necessarily represents a broader lack of willingness or eagerness among conservatives to talk about it. When you look at the polling on the issue, look at Gallup polling from May, 48% of the country describes itself as pro-life, 49% as pro-choice. I think you've got Republicans and conservatives who have been making the case for this moment, for the challenging of Roe v. Wade, because they believe that Roe v. Wade is bad law, that these are made-up rights, and are perfectly willing to have that argument. I think when you get into some of the details of the questioning and what comes next in a post-Roe world is where Republican policymakers are less comfortable talking about it.
You know, Aaron, I got the sense, I'm like, you're describing what he's hoping for. I'm like, you're kind of describing what Roe has allowed for, this uneasy peace that we have on this issue.
Yeah, the thing is, watching that interview, yes, knowing where the rest of the country is on this issue. I mean, you had that polling showing that, the majority of Americans feel like there should be, abortion should be allowed with some exceptions, that it should not be illegal or illegal with few exceptions. Most people are not in favor of that. And so when you have that, I think that maybe is perhaps what some of his hesitancy is on being more vocal about it. But it's not so much what Republicans are saying, it's what they're doing, right? This is what conservatives have been pushing for. This was the long game on abortion. That is absolutely what their voters, use their voice at the ballot box to push for, what the former president pushed for. And what we're seeing now is kind of the fruition of that.
And the Braun interview is fascinating, but in some ways, a more interesting case study is someone like Senator Susan Collins, right, who voted to approve Justice Kavanaugh, said she believed his promises, of course, when he's trying to earn a Supreme Court seat, and will say what the senators want to hear, that Roe was settled law. Then when she was asked about the oral arguments of the court, she said she didn't see them, which sort of feels like the version of I didn't see the tweet, the Supreme Court version of that. And now she has come out and said she believes in Roe. She believes it should be codified. She does not sign on to support a Democratic bill, which would do just that because it goes too far. But she has said she is working for other bipartisan options. She will introduce her own legislation. But the way Congress is divided right now, that legislation, bipartisan, her own, does not have the votes to pass.
Exactly. I'm guessing she's glad that she's up in 20 and wasn't up in 22.
And you saw when she was up, what does she do? She votes against Amy Coney Barrett, which was absolutely an issue in her Senate race.
You know, Eugene, the thing that interests me about a post-Roe world is how many elected officials got to duck their position on abortion for basically my entire lifetime. They got to basically say they're for Roe or against Roe. Now you have to find out, he didn't want it, well, do you criminalize it? You know, it's when you start to get it, I didn't get to the morning after pill. I didn't have time to get to that in the interview. But you start to go in the specifics of reproductive rights law. This is where I think you start to open the Pandora's box.
Right, and that's why it's so complicated. The place where he was most uncomfortable when you guys were talking was what happens next. And that is exactly what people have been talking about who are abortion advocates. Is like, okay, so you don't like Roe v. Wade. What happens after that? And what does that country look like? It looks bifurcated. You look in one state where you can get an abortion and another where a woman could be arrested for getting an abortion. There's also the question that's even more complicated than it was in the 90s when Roe seemed like it might be on the chopping block, which is the abortion pill, right? You can mail an abortion pill to women. So if a woman gets an abortion pill, who in a state that doesn't allow abortion, who's going to look in that mail and say, oh, this is a problem? And for folks like conservatives who've talked a lot about, not having a police state, I talked to some abortion advocates this over this week, they say, well, isn't that exactly what they say they're against? A police state where people are checking the mail for abortion pills.
But I don't think the politics of this are that clear. I mean, look at what happened in Virginia, right? Look at the election there, the gubernatorial election there. You had Terry McAuliffe run a ton of ads, expensive ads, spent a lot of money making abortion a big issue. Right. He said it was going to be one of the #1 issues. I would argue that he mischaracterized Glenn Youngkin's position quite a bit. He makes this argument. Exit polls suggest that only 8% of Virginia voters thought it was the most important issue when they cast their ballots. 59% of those voted for Glenn Youngkin. This was in the context of a big discussion of the Texas abortion ruling. This is in the context of what we knew was going to be this case coming up. I'm not sure it's as cut and dried or pro-Democrat.
But see, what this brings up, Aaron, is that what we've seen is the right is motivated.
Absolutely. And
the left hasn't been. What is it going to take to motivate the left on this issue? The actual overturn itself?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Chuck, because to your point, I think that Democrats were lulled into this kind of false sense of security because you didn't have a conservative court for so long. They thought that this was settled law.
Well, you had people like Kennedy that uphold it. You know, it looked like it was bipartisan. And those, by the way, that was in the era of a third of Democrats were pro-life in the elected Congress, and a third of Republicans were pro-choice in the elected Congress.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? I mean, elections have consequences. I think Republicans certainly understand that. Democrats are kind of beginning to understand what that means, especially around the Supreme Court, whether you're talking about abortion, whether you're talking about issues like voting rights, whether you're talking about gun rights. Democrats are starting to see that when you have, you know, a court that is more conservative, that is absolutely going to challenge some of these things that they thought were kind of settled law.
Look, I'm a little long, so I'm not going to play the bite, but Justice Kagan's argument about overturning precedent was, she was saying there has to be a groundswell, and that's missing here. And she's worried about the politicizing of the court. At the same time, the left is now panicked that Justice Breyer is going to not retire, right? That conversation doesn't help the politicizing issue, does it?
It sure doesn't. And the court has been politicized from former President Trump, talking about my justices, very clearly making the argument that he wanted the 2020 election to get kicked to the Supreme Court because his justices would hand it to him. His justices would hand it to him. So whether or not the court is politicized, you saw the justices in oral arguments raise that concern. You see polling that shows the public believe it. At a certain point with something like the court, perception is reality.
Absolutely.
You know what? The minute you allowed a president to appoint Supreme Court justices, you politicized the court. Right? It's kind of our founders sort of decided that. Anyway, when we come back.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.